the next 20 years, it's quite possible that a very significant fraction of the workforce is simply unemployable. But it's quite possible that artificial intelligence, rather than being this massive boost to the economy, if it produces lots of job losses, could be actually the opposite of that.
But where does it all lead us? So especially when we are talking about white-collar jobs, and at some point in the future, AI can do most of them. What are we doing with the people? Hey everyone, before we are starting with the episode, I need to ask you for a small favor. Every week we are doing a lot of research to get you the best insights. Please support us. Hit the follow button, share the podcast with your friends. Thank you very much. And now, let's start with the episode. Martin, great to have you today. In 2009, you wrote that AI would be Silicon Valley's next killer app. Who told you that you were wrong?
I don't think anyone has told me I'm wrong. I think maybe many people don't remember that I said that back in 2009. But it's definitely the case that it is the killer app, right? It's you look at the enormous amounts of investment that are being put into AI. It's really beyond anything that I imagined back then. So it's really completely taken over the industry and to some extent the world.
Where do you think we are standing right now when it comes to AI in the development?
Well, I think we've obviously seen tremendous progress, and it's incredible what many of the models can do now in terms of being able to solve mathematical proofs and actually push fields like mathematics further as a result of this technology, which is remarkable. And yet at the same time, I really believe that we're kind of at the beginning of this, and it's by no means certain that we're even really at the point where the thing that I've been talking about the most, which is, of course, the impact on the job market, is really going to manifest. I mean, there are a lot of things that are missing from even the most advanced models in terms of capabilities that could match what a human being are doing. So we still have a long way to go. So we're really, I think, at the beginning of this process.
There was a lot of going on right now, especially in the job markets. I mean, a lot of the big companies valued the employees on the use of the AI tokens. But now they are hiring again. So how do you see that?
Right. I don't have a high level of confidence that AI is yet at the point where we're going to see a dramatic impact on jobs. In fact, if you look at this statistical evidence, gathered by economists and so forth, the only real effect that is perhaps there is on entry-level jobs. In other words, people that are, for example, just graduating from university and looking for their first jobs. There is some evidence that in fields that are heavily impacted by AI, there has been less hiring in those areas. But we don't see an across-the-board impact yet. And I think it may well be some time before that happens. It may be the case that today's AI models are simply not yet at the point where they can really begin to replace people. But my argument since I started writing about this in 2009 is really that I think that is inevitable. We will eventually get to the point where probably most workers can be replaced by AI, and we're going to have to prepare for that scenario, because it really means an entirely new framework for our whole economy.
If your job feels boring, that's a warning. Does this still count in regards
absolutely.
to replaceable?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're doing more routine, repetitive things and the kinds of things that would make a job seem to be boring, then those are the things that artificial intelligence is going to be best at, right? And in fact, for really boring jobs, it doesn't even take AI. You can do it with more primitive forms of software automation. And so we've already seen a big impact there. Many jobs that used to exist, for example, in areas of accounting and accounts payable and finance, a lot of those have already been automated. And in fact, you see that large corporations now hire fewer people in, for example, the finance department than they used to, say, back 20 years ago, just simply as a result of software automation. So that's going to continue to progress, and anything that's routine, repetitive, and maybe most importantly, predictable, the kind of thing that machine learning can easily be trained to perform is certainly going to be is going to be automated.
So when you see white-collar jobs as a whole, like what timeline do you think we are right now? And when will AI be able to do most of the jobs there?
Again, it depends on the progression of the technology and the types of jobs you're talking about. The thing about white-collar jobs is some of them are, as you say, very routine, repetitive, and those jobs are definitely going to be susceptible. On the other hand, there are jobs that require tacit knowledge, negotiating with other people, trying to persuade other people to do things. And there are jobs that really require a lot of what you would call on-the-job learning. And I think this is one of the absolutely key things that's missing in the current AI models. For example, if you hire a new college graduate and they show up to work, on that first day, they probably can't do much of anything. But within just a few months, they'll be able to do a lot. And the reason is that they will learn on the job. They'll learn in real time. That's what computer scientists call continual learning. And it's something that the current AI models really don't have the ability to do. So in order to be able to automate a particular kind of job, they need to be trained, either post-trained using reinforcement learning, or it has to be incorporated into the pre-training. So it sort of means that you need to know in advance everything that model is going to be asked to do at least within a very narrow range of possibilities, and anticipate that during the training process in order to produce something that can really automate the job. And again, that may be suitable for more routine, predictable jobs that are quite narrow, that always involve doing the same exact kinds of things. But if you're involved in a broader job that requires more broad-based thinking and requires actually learning as things progress, learning on the job is going to be much harder to do that. So I think that we may quite possibly not see a broad-based impact on white-collar jobs until we have models that can actually perform continual learning.
So what about blue-collar jobs? With the rise of robots at the moment, like how do you see that in the future?
Right, it's kind of the same story with blue-collar jobs. Then, of course, you're actually talking about physical robots. And the jobs that are going to be susceptible are the ones that are routine, repetitive, and most importantly, predictable. And so for that reason, in advanced economies like Germany, robots are already heavily used to do the truly routine things in factories, right? And that's been the case for decades already. Even back in the 1970s, you'd have seen big industrial robots at work, and they can do the things that are genuinely repetitive, and they can do that with enormous efficiency. The jobs that have been left for people in factories are those that are tasks that are more unpredictable. Very often they're tasks that require human level dexterity, visual perception, spatial perception, things like this. And the robots are gradually moving into those areas. And so, for example, in Amazon warehouses, you've got robots that are beginning to be able to grasp varied items off of shelves and fulfill customer orders, which just a short time ago was something that could only be done by human workers. So we are definitely moving to the point where I think in more controlled, predictable environments, like inside factories, inside warehouses and distribution centers, there is probably going to be a very significant impact on employment. Where it's going to take longer is in the outside world, where everything is very chaotic. And that, of course, is the reason it has taken self-driving cars so much longer to arrive than many people thought, right? I mean, when Google first introduced the first modern self-driving car back in 2009, people thought that within 10 years or so, we'd have fully automated cars. And the reality is we still don't really have that. We have, in the United States, Waymo operating in many markets. But even then, they require a great deal of advanced mapping, and there are human operators that oversee the cars. We still don't have automated cars that can really deal with any situation the way that human beings can. And the reason is that the environment is just so unpredictable. There's so much chaos. There are so many so-called edge cases, things that can happen that the system hasn't been prepared for.
Yeah, when it
So I
comes
think
to
it's
robots,
going to take a lot. I'm sorry, I think it's going to take a lot longer to see, for example, humanoid robots that can really deal with entirely unpredictable situations.
A few weeks back, there was this demo from Figure AI where the humanoid robot was flipping the packages on the right side. I mean, it looks as a very easy task on the video, but people don't understand like how complicated this is to get a humanoid robot to do exactly this, right? It's such a complex task at the end of the day. For us, it's easy, but it's very hard to learn that, right?
Right. That's one of the paradoxes of both AI and robotics is that the things that are difficult for human beings, like, for example, advanced mathematics that you see with these most recent AI models are easy for AI. And the things that are very easy for us, especially things that require dexterity, mobility, visual perception, and so forth, these things are very difficult for both robots and for AI. And that gap is narrowing, but I think it's going to take some time.
So what kind of skills should someone learn now to not be replaced in the future? So what should you study? What kind of skills should you learn?
Well, I think that, again, the main thing is not to be doing a job that's entirely predictable and routine. You don't want to be sitting in front of a computer, operating a spreadsheet, doing the same kind of analysis again and again, because that is exactly the kind of thing that can certainly be automated. So what you want is to really, I think, emphasize human interaction, right? Relationship building. I mean, not just being a friendly customer service type job, but the kind of roles where you really have to build relationships with people and have a deep understanding with people, persuade people, have empathy for people. These kinds of roles are going to be much harder to replace with AI. And the other area I think is genuine creativity. For sure, AI is becoming more creative. We can see that, for example, in the generation of graphic design by AI models, which has already impacted employment for some graphic designers. But in the more broad sense, if you're really involved in a kind of complex creativity where you're building something that wasn't there before, thinking outside of the box, drawing upon tacit knowledge, upon knowledge of the real world, and trying to be creative in that sense, I think that in most of those kinds of roles, for the time being at least, and for the foreseeable future, AI is likely to be a tool that amplifies what you can do, that amplifies your creativity, rather than something that's going to completely replace you. So in terms of white-collar jobs, I would emphasize relationship building, complex interactions with other people, creativity, and roles that require continuous learning. In other words, learning as you go in real time. And in the other area that I think is very safe for perhaps a very long time are what we would call skilled trade jobs, right? Things like electricians, plumbers, that require a tremendous amount of mobility and dexterity and problem solving in very unpredictable environments, right? And if you're a plumber going to a house to fix the plumbing, the situation you face is going to be unique every time, right? It's going to be completely different and novel. And so that's, in order to automate a job like that, we would need a science fiction robot, right? Something like C-3PO from Star Wars. And I think it's going to be a long time before we had that. A nurse would be another kind of job that would fall into both that category and also the need for empathy and complex relationship building with patients. So I'd say that among all the jobs out there, the one job I can think of that might be the safest from automation in the near term would be a nurse, right? Because it requires so many qualities that are really hard for us to automate.
But where does it all lead us? So especially when we are talking about white-collar jobs, and at some point in the future, AI can do most of them. What are we doing with the people? Will new jobs be created in the whole AI economy, or is it just we need to figure out a way?
Right. I mean, that's the real question. And the real question is this time different? Because it certainly has been the case that, at least since the Industrial Revolution, technology has displaced jobs, but at the same time, new jobs and even better jobs, right, have been created. And many economists still believe in this, and they will tell you that they think AI is a normal technology in the sense that it's basically going to produce ultimately the same result of other innovations like electricity, for example, where there could be disruption in the short term, but in the long term, there will be new jobs created. I disagree with that. I mean, that's sort of been my thesis since I began writing about this in 2009. And the reason I disagree is that I do think that AI is a unique, unprecedented technology. And it is unique because it is going to ultimately displace the thing that matters most about us as human beings, right? Which is our brains, our cognitive capability. And I think it is our cognitive capability, our ability to learn and to adapt. That is the quality that so far has ensured that we've always had new jobs, right? It's that ability to adapt. But now AI is going to begin to compete directly with that kind of core competence, right? The thing that really sets us apart from every other species on the planet. And I think ultimately the result is going to be different because once AI can learn and adapt in the way we do, and I think, again, that will probably require AI models that are capable of continual learning, right? Learning on the job, which we don't yet have. But once we do have that and we have something close or equal to what is called AGI or human level intelligence, then at that point, I think that virtually any job almost could potentially be automated, and we're going to begin to see a big impact. And I think that at that point, we really begin to think about a world where perhaps the majority of people don't work in the traditional sense. They simply are not able to find a job that they can support themselves in the economy. And then we need to think about a new paradigm, right? And that's where ideas like a universal basic income, a system to replace the income that would normally come from work, so that people can continue to survive in the economy. And most importantly, this is one thing I've really emphasized a lot. It's not just about being able to survive. It's about being able to consume, right? To participate in the economy as a consumer, because the market economy, capitalism, depends on people having sufficient income to go out and buy all the products and services that are being produced, right? Without this, you really can't have a sustainable economy.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about UBI a lot because I don't see a working solution on a global scale. Because as it is right now, I mean, the leader of AI is definitely the US. Like all the big models you have in the US, after that it's China. And if the automation or like the models are coming out of the US, why should the US or US companies, for example, pay UBI for someone sitting in France or in Germany or whatever? Like I think there is a huge gap on a global scale.
Right, and I think that there's a misconception there that I would push it back against, which is the idea that all the value from this is going to be captured by OpenAI and Google and Anthropic. I don't think that's the case. I think that we already see tremendous competition between these leading edge companies. And of course, now we're seeing the open models, especially from China, which are becoming extremely capable. So my guess is that AI will continue to advance, but it's largely going to be commoditized. I mean, I don't think that all the value is going to be captured by the AI companies. The companies that are going to capture the value are going to be those that utilize the artificial intelligence. So it's not going to be the case that all the value is in Silicon Valley, and then there isn't enough income in France to pay workers a basic income. I think that the companies in France and in Germany will utilize AI, and as a result of that, they will be able to eliminate employees. And so the government of Germany will be able to step in and tax those companies or have some sort of a tax in order to pay workers that universal basic income. So I don't think that all the value is going to just accumulate in one place. I think it will be distributed to all of the different companies and organizations and individuals that can utilize AI in productive ways.
So at the end of the day, it probably needs global efforts. So the governments need to create some kind of model that works for all.
I think it would require coordination, but I do think that each country will probably need to have their own basic income in order for this to work out, right? And obviously the level of those basic incomes will be very different depending on the wage levels in those countries, right? So that will make it more approachable. But there's no question it is a staggering economic, fiscal, and political problem to ever have a universal basic income. And the only thing I'm saying at this point is we need to start thinking about that in advance. We should be having more pilot programs, for example, testing this idea, coming up with, and we should have more economists actually looking at this to try to come up with concrete ideas. Because, of course, if this really begins to unfold and we start to be seeing a big impact on jobs, we don't know how fast that could happen, right? Hopefully it will be quite gradual, but it might happen quite rapidly. So I do think we need to be prepared. I think that's probably all we can do at this point. We can't enact I don't think that we're not going to be able to enact something like universal basic income until we get to the point where it becomes very clear where we're headed for or already in a crisis. I mean, I think that's probably the political reality.
Yeah, and this can actually happen very, very fast. And I think there's still a lot of, I mean, especially when I see European countries, right? A lot of them are still sleeping on AI. Don't see it like having these major effects on the economy that it will have, especially when it comes to Germany. And I think most of the countries are far ahead about thinking about something like UBI. They still try to understand what AI in general means for their economy.
Yeah, I mean, and there are many questions on that, right? There are lots of economists that are studying it to try to find what's happening. And as I said, right now, based on the evidence we have so far, which is very little, because I mean, we were only talking about, 3.5 years since the arrival of ChatGPT, right? And for most of that 3.5 years, these models were definitely not capable of automating many jobs. It's really within the last year or so, really only maybe within the last 6 months that, in particular, agents, right, have begun to become really powerful. So it's really quite recent that we really even should be taking it seriously about what's happening right now. It's still really a question for the future. So I think that as the economists study this, there will inevitably come a point where they do begin to see evidence of job displacement, right? And I think countries will begin to take it more seriously. But again, even in the United States, where AI is maybe furthest along, the idea of a UBI is just a staggering political challenge. I mean, it's almost unimaginable. So even the countries that are most invested in AI are not very far along in coming out with the problem if this really happens.
And I think like the progress is going so fast, like just like seeing 2 months ago, like the actual models from Anthropic or OpenAI to what we have now and what we can do now. Do you see a risk that the development is going too fast and the government and people are not able to catch up?
It's possible. I mean, it's definitely been remarkable how fast these systems are progressing. Again, though, I really emphasize the need for continual learning in order to really see a big impact on jobs, and I haven't seen much progress there. So right now, AI is a very powerful tool, and in certain fields like mathematics, it's been really incredible what it's been able to do so far. But in terms of displacing average people doing average jobs, we definitely see much less capability there. So it really depends, I think, on what breakthroughs occur and how fast they occur. And the reality is that unless you have inside information about what's happening in the AI labs, we really don't know. So it could still be quite a while before we really begin to see strong evidence of this, I think. And that, of course, is perhaps a good thing. It'll give us a chance to think more about what's coming and hopefully adapt some good ideas.
Do you think with especially the big frontier labs, are generating too much power? Like, for example, with their new closed models, they are creating new things in materials, biochemistry, in medics, and they get patents out of it. And they are at some point, they are owning all new developments.
Well, it's not clear that the AI companies will own, I mean, maybe they'll get a share of it, but I think that, there's going to be pharmaceutical companies, right, using AI to discover new drugs. There are going to be companies that are doing materials research that use AI. And again, companies are also turning increasingly toward the open weight models, right, many of which come from China. In which case they'll be able to use them without giving up any intellectual property. So it all depends on how far the frontier companies can stay ahead. If they can really truly be the only ones that have this capability, I think we just don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, that was last week. Jensen Huang did a post on X where he was speaking in favor of open models. It was together with a lot of the big companies like Andreessen Horowitz, IBM, Mistral, Black Forest, etc. How do you see that, like the importance of open models compared to the closed ones?
It's definitely incredibly important, and by some accounts, they're only a few months behind the frontier. So again, it's hard to say what's going to happen. I mean, it's going to be very damaging to the business models of Anthropic and OpenAI in particular if these models, become essentially comparable, or even if they're only a few months behind, because what that means is that, that means that whatever is the frontier today, 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, or whatever, the open source models are going to be able to compete with that. So I think that's a real issue, and it brings into question whether people are going to pay what they would need to pay in order for these companies to be profitable in the future, if in fact the open source models are only a few months behind. So that could really throw in, people keep saying all the value is going to accumulate to Anthropic and OpenAI, but it may be the case that they don't even have sustainable business models in this world where everything becomes more open source. So I think it's just really an open question. I certainly can't predict how it's going to turn out.
And where do you see China and the Chinese models and all of that?
Definitely, they are right now, they have the very best open source models, which is a bit surprising and perhaps unfortunate. I would definitely like to see, US companies also get more competitive, but right now, many of the startups in Silicon Valley are relying on Chinese technology, which is a bit disturbing, obviously. So we have to see how that plays out.
And how do you see like the risks of it? I mean, last week, for example, a model from OpenAI broke out of the test environment, and now the CEO of Hugging Face is calling for radical transparency. So how do you see that? Where do we standing on the risk side?
The risks, I think, particularly in terms of cyber risks, are very high. I mean, we've all heard about Mythos and its ability to hack some of the most important software in the world, and if in fact open source models are going to get to that same level of capability in 6 months or so and become freely available, that's actually quite concerning and terrifying. So I do think we need some controls over those things, but it's very difficult because, again, the leading edge open source models are coming out of China. So it's very difficult to know exactly how it's all going to play out and how we can respond to that. I do think it's good that the leading edge models are being made available to organizations so that they can develop, protection in advance before this capability becomes more widely spread. But I think it's going to be a real problem.
Are we moving too fast?
We may be, but I don't know how to slow it down. Again, because a lot of this capability is based in China, right? So I sort of think that the toothpaste is out of the tube in some sense, that it's very difficult to slow it now. The best thing is to continue proceeding and try to adapt to it as best we can.
So at the moment, you also think it's a race between the US and China to get to some point of AGI. A lot of experts are calling for let's pause AI development, but I'm here on your side. I don't see things happen because not all countries will agree to that. And if as soon as you have one country not agreeing to that, they will just continue and get ahead of the rest, right?
That's right. And it would be very difficult to enforce or to verify, much more difficult, for example, than nuclear weapons technology. So I think we have to kind of hope that the industries, both in the US and in China and other countries, are going to be responsible. I do believe that the Chinese Communist Party is also concerned about these issues, right? They don't, in addition to all the safety issues that we worry about, they worry about their own power, right? And the idea that extremely powerful AI might be a threat to the control that the party has over Chinese government and society. So I do think that they also have a strong incentive to keep these models under control.
So tell us about your new book. What are the predictions in there? Like, why did you write it?
Well, it's actually an update to Rise of the Robots, right, which was originally published back in 2015. And I wrote a new chapter and a new introduction, which basically covers the latest developments in AI up until the point that the book was published, and also speculates something about the future. And one the things that I worry the most about are the potential impact on the economy. I mean, the conventional wisdom in Silicon Valley is that AI is going to be this enormous boost to the economy. There are some people in Silicon Valley that are saying we're going to see economic growth rates of 20 or 30%, in a country like the United States, which would be, just incredible. I mean, even China, never saw a growth rate at that rate, as it was developing from a point where pretty much everyone was riding a bicycle, right? For that level of growth in a developed country would just be extraordinary. And I don't think it's very likely. And part of the reason I don't think it's likely is that there is going to be ultimately an impact on employment. And if there's an impact on employment, then of course there's an impact on consumers, right? When people are afraid of losing their jobs, they stop spending, right? They cut back. They start becoming more cautious. This is what we see in every normal recession, right? In the United States, we typically see a recession every 6 or 7 years, something like that. And it happens every time, right? We see rising unemployment, we saw falling consumer spending, and the economy goes into negative growth. And this happens quite routinely. And I think that AI could produce perhaps a much more serious, much more severe recession than we see in a normal case. And the reason is that the job losses might well be perceived as permanent, right? I mean, you in a normal recession, people understand companies will lay off workers, but eventually things will recover and companies will start hiring again and the jobs will come back. And so during the recession, people are to some extent willing to keep spending on the basis of their savings because they believe that things are going to recover. But in the case of AI, if people really come to believe that this is going to create a permanent disruption, especially to high-paying white-collar jobs, and perhaps those jobs may never come back, right? Then they're going to be really fearful. And I think we could see an even more serious downturn. So it is quite possible that artificial intelligence, rather than being this massive boost to the economy, if it produces lots of job losses, could be actually the opposite of that. Could be something that really gets us into a kind of an economic crisis, perhaps something on the scale of what we saw back in 2008. So that's one of the fears that I actually write about in the book and delve into in more depth. And I think it's something that definitely has not been given enough consideration by economists and by policymakers, because I think it's a real danger.
So do you see similarities to the dot-com bubble? I mean, to that time also like the rising stars like Amazon crashed around 90%, but now it's like one of the biggest companies in the world. So do you think we need to see that crash?
Well, many people, of course, are talking about an AI bubble, and it is true that there is an incredible amount of investment in AI. And it is also true that every time previously in history where we've seen this kind of massive investment in a new technology, it's always created a bubble. That was true, for example, with the railroads, when that technology came across. It was true with the telecom bubble, right? When everybody was over-investing in fiber optic, fiber optic cables. In each of those cases, it did create a bubble and a corresponding crash. So it does seem quite possible that there's going to be something similar with AI. And there are also differences, I mean, when the United States built the railroads, there was a bubble, and a lot of the companies that were doing that went out of business. But of course, the railroad tracks that they laid remained, right, and were still useful. And that's one of the arguments that economists will make, that a bubble isn't necessarily such a bad thing, because you end up with this technology that has been built. AI is a little bit different though, because it relies on these processors, right, from NVIDIA and other companies, and they have a pretty short lifetime. It's not like laying railroad tracks. These GPUs don't last forever, right, or they certainly become obsolete within a relatively short time frame. So that may make it even more difficult to generate the return to pay for all of this investment. So yeah, I am kind of worried that there could well be a bubble, and that of course itself would generate significant unemployment. I mean, it would be devastating to the economy. So in a sense, you can say that there's two ways in which AI could produce a lot of unemployment. One is if it automates jobs, and the other is if we really do have an AI bubble, which causes a crash, and we get the kind of unemployment that would come in a normal financial crisis. So those are both very real possibilities, and they're not mutually exclusive, right? You could have the AI bubble burst and an economic financial crisis as a result of that. Lots of people lose their jobs. But at the same time, AI doesn't disappear, right? It's still, the capability is still there. And in the midst of a crisis where companies are under tremendous pressure, they're going to have more incentive to try to automate jobs, right? This is what happened in the Great Depression. That was actually a time when technological labor-saving technology progressed quite rapidly back in the 1930s. You could see that again with AI, right? That people lose their jobs because of a financial crisis or an economic crisis brought on by the collapse of the AI bubble. But over time, as companies begin to adopt the technology, they may not need to hire back as many people, right, in the future. So it may make it very, very difficult to actually recover from that crisis. So again, these are all scenarios that I think we need to worry about, and economists, I think, should be giving more attention to that, worrying about that more, planning for that, coming up with policy responses to that.
But isn't it also the case right now that it is really hard to scale AI because so many things are missing, like data centers, energy, raw materials, processors. So how do you see that overall?
Yeah, I mean, companies certainly want to make these investments. Right now in the US, there's a big backlash against data centers, in part because initially the companies were talking a lot about potential job losses. They've now backed off as they see that the public has a sort of a negative perception to that. But I believe that, even though they're not talking about it, someday it's inevitable. So yeah, there are a lot of political issues with building new data centers in terms of the energy. China certainly has an advantage in terms of their ability to build data centers in the future, because they don't have this public backlash like we have in the United States, and also because they have a lot more energy. So again, that's reason to be concerned about this race, right, that's ongoing. So we'll have to see where it plays out. I think that eventually these companies are going to build the data centers. They'll have to perhaps build them in different locations than they originally planned if we see backlash to them, as we are seeing, for example, in New York State, which has just put a moratorium on building any new data centers.
And it will be interesting to see how this plays out, because as I see it right now, the AI models are getting better day by day. So we are getting more and more advanced AI models to use. But on the other end, building data centers and everything to scale this takes years. So there's a huge gap between what the AI models can do and how we can roll them out into the people in general. And I think this gap can cause a lot of issues, because when you have advanced models but you cannot roll them out, maybe the interest or the people are losing the interest in AI overall, and then this bubble bursts because not many people are using AI anymore, or are not confident that it will come eventually, and then we even have a more backlash on it.
Well, in terms of, individual people, like consumers using AI, I think that very, very few people are using frontier models, right? I mean, even me, for the most part, I'm not doing anything with advanced models, because the free version that anyone can use is already sufficient for most of what I need to do in terms of researching topics and things like that. So I think it's quite a small number of people, mostly in businesses and universities, do really require the frontier models. To some extent, there are indications that we may have overcapacity in data centers, right? You may have heard that Elon Musk's company xAI has leased out basically a lot of its capacity in its data centers to Anthropic. Meta is reportedly thinking of doing the same sort of thing. So I think it's actually not the case that across the board there is not enough capacity. There are in certain cases for the most advanced models like Anthropic's Fable and so forth. But those models, of course, are very, very expensive, and very few people are using them. So again, I think we need to see how it plays out. And again, let's not forget about the open source models, which can be deployed, companies can deploy those models on their own hardware, right? They don't necessarily need a massive data center to do that.
So you don't think we have a problem on the infrastructure side?
I'm not sure. We might. It depends on how it progresses, and so. But so far, at this moment, if companies are leasing out excess capacity, then I would say that at this moment, we probably do not. And the problem is that all of this massive investment, the data centers that are really being built now or being planned for the future, are based on forecasts that may or may not come to fruition, right? I've seen some accounts that OpenAI, for example, has dramatically missed its revenue projections. It's the usage may be there in terms of people using ChatGPT for free, but they aren't getting the levels of revenue that they had planned for. So this is a big problem, right? You can't just keep investing enormous amounts in these data centers if ultimately there isn't a return for the companies from doing this, right? And so far they're all losing money when they're not seeing that return.
Do you also think, or do you see that AI could be a risk for humanity at all? A few years back, also like Sam Altman said something similar to that. There is a percentage, there's a chance that the risk is out there. You don't see them talking about it right now. Obviously they are all before the IPO, but do you think there is a risk?
Yes, I think that risk is serious and needs to be taken seriously. That implies artificial superintelligence, right? In other words, a system that not only matches the human brain, which hasn't happened yet, but exceeds us, right? And essentially we somehow lose control of that system because it's so far beyond us. I think that's definitely a very real concern. I don't think it's an immediate near-term concern. In the near term, I'm much more concerned about, for example, the impact on jobs, and also rather than the idea of a super intelligence getting away from us and acting independently in a way that might cause us harm. I'm much more concerned about what other nefarious people are going to do with AI. And that in particular, I worry about cyber hacking and so forth. You know, once really advanced models like Mythos become available to more people, including, you know, cyber hackers and so forth. But again, that's a threat from other human beings using AI as a tool, not from so much AI as a autonomous entity, right? I think that possibility is a real concern, but it lies further in the future.
I mean,
But there are
we
a lot
talked
of people that, sorry, but there are a lot of people that have been thinking about that for a long time. I mean, there are think tanks, for example, that have been investing in that question. The alignment question is what it's called. And so I think that the fact that there are some smart people thinking a lot about that is a good thing.
So we talked a lot about the risks. What are the good things coming out of AI for humanity?
Well, the good things, I mean, and this is something that I always emphasize when I talk about this, is that, I mean, ultimately, I think that the good things outweigh the risks, including even the potential for jobs to be lost, even if we can adapt to that, right? We can come up with a new system, something like a UBI, so that we can continue to have a vibrant economy. I think that the positives from AI will outweigh the negatives. And the positives, you know, most importantly, are going to be in science and technology and the advances that we're going to see there, right? We are quite possibly on the threshold of a much more broad-based progression in science and technology. So far, what we're seeing is advances in AI and in computers and in information technology, and in other fields we haven't seen quite so much progress. But I think AI is really going to be the catalyst to make that happen, right? We're going to see breakthroughs across the board. Certainly, you see evidence of that already in terms of what's happening in the field of mathematics, right? With these AI systems. And, you know, math isn't a field that is necessarily tremendously important to the economy by itself, but once that branches out and it gets into physics, right, and other areas of science, it's going to be tremendously powerful. Probably the most exciting thing that has happened so far has been Google DeepMind's AlphaFold system, right, which solved the protein folding problem. And this is a system that scientists have, I mean, this is a question that scientists have been working with for at least half a century. They've been trying to figure out how can you calculate using quantitative methods how a protein molecule folds into some very complex three-dimensional shape within milliseconds of after it's fabricated in a cell, right? And this is kind of the key to in many ways to all of biology, because it's the shape of a protein molecule that determines actually what it does, right? And it's an understanding of that is really crucial in areas like biotechnology, developing new drugs, bioengineering, you know, genetic engineering, all of these kinds of areas. So AlphaFold was really just kind of a revolutionary breakthrough that has led to basically a catalog of all the shapes of the protein molecules that are important in biology. And this is likely to have just a dramatic impact on medicine, on developing new drugs, developing new kinds of microorganisms and so forth. So, and that's why, you know, Demis Hassabis and his colleagues received the Nobel Prize for that development, because it's such an important breakthrough. And I think that is kind of a foreshadowing of what we can expect in many different areas as AI continues to advance. I mean, that's definitely the great hope of AI. That's the thing. That's the reason that we should be most excited that it's going to result in this acceleration in science and technology. We're going to have breakthroughs in new types of energy. For example, there are many startups doing fusion energy, right? And they're all heavily reliant on artificial intelligence. So the hope is that we're going to see breakthroughs in many, many different areas. And that's going to lead to the kinds of solutions to all of the problems that are currently facing us. And that's the reason to be enthusiastic about artificial intelligence.
So expanding the human lifespan, do you think that's a thing?
That is certainly a focus of many people. I mean, there's tremendous interest in longevity in Silicon Valley. I actually I did a book of interviews a few years ago, and I talked to Ray Kurzweil, right, who's one of the probably the most well-known proponent of the idea of the singularity, right? The idea that we're going to see this absolutely tremendous, incomprehensible level of progress in science and technology as the result of the advent of superintelligence. And Ray told me, he's well over 70 years old now, but he told me he expects to never die, right? He takes many, many medications and supplements every day and so forth. And he really believes that he's achieved what he calls longevity escape velocity, which means that he expects to live long enough for the next important breakthrough to happen that can keep him alive even long enough for the next breakthrough to happen, right? So that he'll just keep going and he's never going to die. I mean, I personally am a bit skeptical of that. I, for example, do not expect to live forever for sure. But no doubt AI is going to result in important medications, breakthroughs, hopefully, treatments for things like cancer. So it could have the impact of certainly expanding longevity and giving us all a longer lifespan, or at least hopefully a more healthy lifespan, health span, right? In other words, where we might not live for that much longer. The length of time that we do live, whether it's only to 80 or 90 as we see now, those years will be much more healthy, right? And we won't have the kind of decline that we now see. That's certainly a big hope for the kind of research that perhaps AI is going to enable.
So what do you think, like, how long will we be on that bumpy road as we are right now, where nobody knows how AI is developing, how big are the risks, how do you implement it, how does UBI work, etc., etc. Like, how long will we be on that bumpy road until we are on a, let's call it, stable AI environment?
Right. That's really a question that I wouldn't attempt to answer, because I would certainly be wrong if I made a prediction there. I think that no one is going to be able to predict that. And I think that the key to this is that we're going to have to think on our feet, right? The point is to start studying this now. And again, the economists are certainly studying the impact on the job market, the impact on the economy. And I think that's a good thing. But we need to go beyond that. And we also need to start really making a big investment in specific policy responses, so that we can have some ideas on the table, right? If and when this unfolds, it's not enough to just speak in broad terms about a UBI. Even in my book, I talk in relatively broad terms about ideas for a universal basic income, and I think these are good ideas, but we probably need these concepts to be fleshed out much more practically, right? So that we have something that can be put into place much more rapidly if in fact this really unfolds. But I think the main thing is to get a lot more smart people focused on this, to have a lot more economists and policy makers have a bit more of an open mind about the potential impact of AI on the economy. Hey, it's possible that I could be wrong, and that the economists are right, and that AI is never going to really permanently lead to a lot of people not working. But I think a lot more people need to be open to the possibility that in fact could happen, because I personally think it's likely and almost inevitable at some point in the future. I just can't tell you when that's going to happen. So I do think that more people should be thinking a lot more seriously about this, and that's really one of the main points of me releasing a new edition of my book is that I hope it will attract enough attention to get people really thinking seriously about this.
So what would you tell people who are skeptical or worried about AI?
I would say that, there are good reasons to be worried. And we should take all of these concerns seriously, whether it's the impact on the job market, the threats from things like cyber hacking using advanced AI, and even in the further future, the idea that AI itself, autonomously and in the form of a superintelligence could be a threat. Those are all concerns that I would take seriously. But at the same time, there's enormous benefit that will come from this technology, and that we should not turn against it. And I think that realistically it's too late to do that anyway. We can't afford to do that because the Chinese aren't going to turn against it, right? So we really can't just stop the technology. We've got to embrace it, but at the same time, we should be putting a very, very significant investment in figuring out how to adapt to all of the changes and all of the risks and all of the dangers that are going to come coupled with this technology. I think that we can't just sit back and pretend everything's going to be fine, nor should we assume everything's going to be a disaster and try to put a halt to it. Where, it has to be something in between where we are being flexible and open-minded and, working hopefully in a very proactive way to address the risks and the downsides as we embrace the upsides of this technology.
Martin, as a closing question, because this is a question I'm asking everyone who is on the show, what is your wildest prediction for the next 20 years?
Wow. Probably, I would say that in the next 20 years, it's quite possible that a very significant fraction of the workforce is simply unemployable. And as a result, we have a completely new approach, right, to our economy and a new set of values, which say that maybe it's not so important that everyone works. And we begin to value other things, right? And I think that could happen within 20 years. I mean, it may take longer than that. But I do think that that's probably the most radical prediction that I've been making for a long time. And I think that it's almost inevitable that we're going to have to come up with a new framework for the economy and a new set of values, right, in terms of where we derive our self-worth from. For many people, it may not be working for a job for which they get paid for. We may have to come up with other ideas to occupy our time, to give us a sense of fulfillment, a sense of accomplishment, and we also should come up with new ideas in terms of the respect we give to other people. It may not in the future be just about the job they have or what they're doing in terms of a career or how much money they make and things like that. We may need to completely reorient that. And that is an extraordinary, radical idea, which is going to require changes that even I can't foresee. And I don't know how we're exactly going to navigate through that. But it's going to be an enormous challenge, certainly the biggest challenge that we faced in many, many generations in order to navigate through that kind of a change.
Martin Ford, thank you very much. We are adding the links to your book in the show notes.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to have this conversation.